Hello and welcome back to the Pain Free for Life podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Vanbergen, and today I'm joined by Dr. Miles Nichols. Dr. Miles is a functional medicine doctor specializing in Lyme, mold illness, gut, thyroid, and autoimmunity. After Dr. Miles personally struggled with chronic fatigue in his early 20s, he dedicated himself to figure out the root causes. He suffered with and recovered from thyroid dysfunction, autoimmunity, gut infection, Lyme co-infections, as well as mold illness. Dr. Miles has authored 2 books and is a certified Sheng Zhen Meditation teacher and a certified Wim Hof Method instructor. He founded the Medicine with Heart Functional Medicine Clinic in Colorado, as well as the Institute for Conscious Medicine that trains other doctors in functional medicine. In today's episode, Dr. Miles and I discuss the 5 big killers and why they are important to know, as well as ways to test for the presence of those killers, the concept of inflammaging, and how to combat all of this as best as we can.
Welcome back to Pain Free for Life, where we share how to successfully overcome all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And now, here's your host, co-founder, and board-certified holistic healthcare practitioner, Dr. Rob Vanbergen.
Dr. Miles, thank you for coming on the show.
Dr. Rob, thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, I'm really excited to have you here. So I'm going to dive into a question that I suppose maybe will have multiple answers from different people. But from your perspective, what would you say are the top kind of killers today, and why are they important to know?
Well, I'd even call sometimes I like to call them the inevitables, because there are some things that are coming, right? They're progressing. I was just reading a paper about the importance of atherosclerosis in pediatrics, and that was published in a peer-reviewed journal that's pretty popular, that was finding that on autopsy, they found it was in, unfortunately, a war-torn environment where some children got killed, but they were autopsying 15-year-olds, and they found that fatty streaks were present in a significant percentage of them, meaning that the cardiovascular illness, heart problems, they're starting early. They're starting maybe in the teens, maybe even before, maybe even in early childhood. It begins. And this is progressing slowly, hopefully slowly for most people throughout the life. But of course, we know number one killer today is atherosclerosis. So heart issues are so much more than just, of course, a heart attack, or there's circulation problems. There are problems with function in the body. There's neuropathies. There are a lot of things that have a relationship to cardiovascular, but we'd say heart, cardiovascular, atherosclerosis is one of those inevitables. The other, of course, that's really important is the brain. We know a brain connection with chronic pain, a brain connection with chronic fatigue. And of course, the big concern with neurodegeneration in the long run is Alzheimer's, dementia, cognitive decline. That can actually be significant. We now know that 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's, according to the Alzheimer's Association. And that's big on the rise. It's becoming a much bigger issue. And no one wants that. That's really an unpleasant way to go. But the early signs of brain issues, sometimes they are pain, fatigue, brain fog, things that a lot of people are struggling with that they don't pay attention to. So a spectrum of neurodegenerative issues. I wish people knew the earlier signs and would pay more attention early on with brain dysfunction. That's 2, heart and brain. Then we have body, and body is the deterioration of the muscular structure and the bone structure. We know that bones break down and muscles become broken apart. We have sarcopenia in old age. It's pretty common. Up to 45% of 80-year-olds will be struggling with some degree of sarcopenia, which is muscle breakdown. And we also know that, unfortunately, some of the causes of death for people are due to muscle and or bone issues, where a fall leads to a fracture, leads to hospitalization, leads to maybe an infection in the hospital like pneumonia. And then maybe the death gets pinned on pneumonia, but really it started with a fall, and it started with that body structure becoming an issue. So now we have heart, we have brain, and we have body. Then we have two that are a little harder to talk about, but one is cells and cellular issues. These are cancers, right? So we have cancers that develop, but we have other cellular problems that come earlier. And we have mitochondrial issues. We have issues that occur, methylation issues that affect cells. And then later in a person's aging process, one of the inevitables, it's almost 40% of people have some cancer in their lives. And then we have the fifth, which is the engine or the metabolism or metabolic diseases. And these are going to be it's that energy production engine. We're going to see blood sugar, prediabetes, diabetes issues. We are going to see other problems occur like fatigue and other issues with metabolism that are going to be an issue for people earlier in life. But of course, later in life, we see metabolic dysfunction playing a big role in causing death and immobility and in contributing to cardiovascular illness and contributing to some of these others. So the big five, we have the heart, the brain, the body, the engine, and the cells are the big five that are the inevitable things that are coming. And there are early signs and there are later signs of those.
What do you think about, you mentioned, seeing these kids that are having heart issues so young. What do you think the reason for that is? Is there a defined reason? Is it diet? Is it lifestyle?
Weirdly, I read a paper recently that just came out, actually. It was about finding microplastics in plaque. Now, they found more than a 300% increase in risk of the same level of plaque if there were microplastics in the plaque. So that's just one of many reasons we're exposed. There's some studies looking at urinary excretion of microplastics that showed some people have as much as 5 grams per week measured. And that's about the equivalent of a credit card in weight. So literally unfortunately, people today are consuming a credit card's worth of weight of plastics, nanoplastics in a week's time. I think this is a huge problem. Hormonally, this is a huge problem. Now we know it's increasing cardiovascular risk. And that's one of many reasons. Diet, processed foods, environmental exposures. There are lots of reasons why I think heart issues and plaque is developing so early. But that's an interesting one, is that the microplastics, I think, are playing a big role. And the diet and lifestyle issues are a mismatch as well in our current day versus how we evolved.
Right. Do you think that's kind of the same across the board? Because obviously people seem to have this idea that, like with Alzheimer's, especially when you're talking with the elderly, that they just kind of think it's an inevitable. It is coming in the end. Alzheimer's, everyone that's old gets Alzheimer's. We know that's not true, and that's not normal, and that's not expected. Do you think it's a similar thing? It's lifestyle. It could even be these microplastics being involved as well.
Yeah, and there's such a link also with blood sugar dysfunction and metabolic dysfunction with cardiovascular illness. They go hand in hand. So we do see that diet becomes important, excessive carbohydrate and processed food intake becomes important, and definitely exposures, microplastics, even pesticides, herbicides, fungicides may play a role in metabolic dysfunction. Overuse of antibiotics at a young age will disrupt the microbiome and will contribute as well. So we see a lot of reasons why I think we are seeing this significant increase. But yeah, we could say these things are inevitable in the sense that they tend to eventually progress for most people most of the time. But then we have to ask the question, are they really inevitable? Mm-hmm. And it's weird because we've not always seen in history, all cultures have some of these issues as big killers. So they're not so inevitable, but they seem to be.
Yeah. It's like the new modern inevitable. One of these things is going to get us in the end. And again, I look back, I think about it. I'm like, you don't read history and hear of all these people dying of Alzheimer's, or, it's just an interesting development of the world's trajectory, I suppose. Okay. So talking about labs for a second here. So if we want to know, are we on the path to one or more of these killers? Like, what do you find are the most useful tests for people to do to assess that progression and sort of see how they might be doing?
Yeah. So if someone's really preventively minded, they want to live a long time, they want to be strong in their golden years, they want to be healthier, happier, stronger for longer, then the kinds of things we'd want to look at are going to be, if I'm picking 12, the top 12, three of them would be imaging. So we'd actually image the brain. We'd do an MRI without contrast, no need for contrast on this. And the MRI of the brain, we'd run it through an AI analysis called NeuroQuant. And the NeuroQuant AI analysis will look at exact volume of different regions of the brain and compare to age-matched control. So we know, for example, I just did one on a 37-year-old male, and we compared against the volume of other 37-year-old males, and he had 5 brain regions atrophying, meaning 5 were smaller or atrophying than age-matched controls, which is very concerning at 37. We really do not want to see 5 atrophies. So we had to talk about, okay, we have 5 atrophies. Here's what we know about these 5 atrophies is that it looks like toxin and a certain bacteria in your environment may be playing a role. So we sent off a dust sample and a skin sample to see if he's dealing with that in his environment. And if he is, then we're on a good track to helping potentially be able to even recover the gray matter in the brain. And we do see sometimes it change. So an MRI of the brain, no need for contrast, but an AI analysis called NeuroQuant can be very useful. The second imaging is a CCTA. This is a coronary CT angiogram. This is a CT of the chest. And so it's an imaging of the chest. And then an AI analysis called Clearly. And the Clearly AI analysis will let us see the arteries and see the amount of plaque. So I know how many millimeters of plaque are present in my chest area and all the different arteries that are going. And I know where exactly. And I'm lucky enough to have a small amount, but I'm monitoring it because my dad passed on when I was 15, unexpectedly and suddenly. And I don't want that for myself. I want to know what's the predisposition, where am I at now, and I want to be able to track it over time. And we can do that very accurately when it comes to atherosclerosis using CCTA with Clearly analysis. So that's the second imaging. The third imaging is a DEXA body composition, and that's going to look at exact grams of muscle, fat, bone density, water. We know if it's visceral adipose tissue, which is more problematic than fat in other areas. And we're going to be able to track and see and create goals based on that. So I was able to, for myself, look at my body composition, create a goal for my muscle and my fat percentage and do the work and retest and see where I'm at as I get to reimage and see my progress and know, am I heading towards what on average about from age 30, it's about 6.8% muscle loss per decade. And as it gets to 60, it gets even more than that. I don't want that. I want stabilization. I want even to increase my muscle mass so that I can be okay to deteriorate later. I want to be okay. I want to have enough muscle now, more than I need, so that when I'm in my 80s, I can have the muscle to go for hikes, to lift a grandchild, to do the things that I want to be able to do. So that's another imaging is DEXA body composition. So now we have 3 imaging of the brain, of the chest, and of the whole body, looking at muscle and fat and water and bone density. And these are going to cover our body, our brain, and the cardiovascular side from an imaging perspective. We also want some blood testing to take a look at those as well. So a comprehensive blood analysis that looks at cardiometabolic markers and some of the inflammatory markers that we know to relate to brain problems and some of the inflammatory markers that we know to relate to some of the other body issues, body pain, things that can become an issue later in life.
Right.
So that would be a comprehensive blood analysis. And then we have a few other tests. It's always important to do some kind of gut microbiome testing or some kind of gut test to see what's going on, because there's such a link between gut and brain, gut and metabolism, gut and lots of things going on in the body. So some gut testing is really important. And then it's also, I like to do a test called a Nutri-Eval, and that's looking at nutrients, methylation, mitochondria, metals, amino acids. It's looking at B vitamins. It's looking at lots of different aspects that, unfortunately, it is hard to get these nutrients in total balance from the diet today for various reasons. And to be able to understand nutrient deficiencies, nutrient excesses, and also to look at methylation and mitochondrial function on one lab is pretty amazing. It's a comprehensive lab. So some kind of nutrient screen like that is really important as well. And then I like also taking a look at a visual contrast sensitivity test, a VCS test. This is easy to do at home from the computer. That's part of why I like it. People can do it at home. And it gives people a sense for whether they might be exposed to toxin in their environment or infections that might be playing a role in contributing to chronic inflammatory response.
Yeah.
So it's a nice preventive to see if people might be exposed to something that could be a problem and to help to know if it's good to do more digging.
Right.
If someone wants to know the rate of aging, there are epigenetic tests and what's called a PACE test that looks at how fast are you aging? 1 year per year, 0.8 years per year, 1.2 years per year. And that gives a general sense for how on track you are with diet, lifestyle, environment, exposures, sleep. It kind of gives a general sense based on gene expression patterns of genes we know is associated with living longer and associated with disease, and gives a number to that to give an overall sense. And then we have gene expression testing that looks at disease too. So that looks at causes of inflammation, that looks at metabolic dysfunction. Test called the Genie looks at gene expression of a bunch of genes. I was just reviewing one with a patient, and her defensins were upregulated, which the two defensin genes upregulated is very specific to show that there's some infection likely somewhere causing some inflammation for her. And that may be part of the reason why she's experiencing significant pain and some brain fog. And so the Genie test is a gene transcriptomics test that's quite useful as well. So those are some of the big picture ones that I think are most useful to screen for taking a look at these quote unquote inevitables, or these things that tend to progress, and to be able to get a sense ahead of time on them, and to know, because if you wait for diagnosis, unfortunately, the first symptom of cardiovascular illness can be a heart attack, can be a big problem. You do not want to wait until you get diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, because there's much less that can be done at that point as compared to much earlier.
Right. And so it sounds like most of these tests would require like a doctor's order. Are there any of those that can be gotten independently online? I know a lot of people struggle with that, because I have that come up for patients all the time, is like, my doctor won't do these tests, right? And I mean, it's kind of like maybe get a new doctor, but is that the answer, or?
Well, yes, and the VCS test you can do online at home on your own. So the VCS test is a good initial screen for people to do on their own. I really like that one because it can give you a sense for whether to dig a little deeper. And that test is, there's a couple websites. There's survivingmold.com. There's vcstest.com. So there are a couple places you can get a VCS test online. It's inexpensive. You can do it on your own. And if you fail that test, you have biotoxin positive on it, that would be a time. And especially if it has a symptom questionnaire too. And if that's showing an issue, that would be a time to explore more deeply environmental toxicity or infections, which then you might need a doctor to order some additional testing at that point if it's an issue. But you can order tests on your home. So if it is an environmental issue, you can do a dust sample on the home to look for mold and endotoxin and actinomycetes. Envirobiomics is a good lab people can use on their own, but it's a nuance to interpret it and know what to do with it. So then you end up probably working with someone at that point. And there are some direct-to-consumer lab companies that might let you do some of the stool testing or SIBO breath testing, some of the gut testing. And sometimes you can cash pay order some of the blood testing. So if we pick out specific markers like apolipoprotein B, or ApoB is a good marker for cardiovascular issues. So you could order that cash pay on your own. But again, how do you interpret it, and what do you do about it? It gets hard.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. And so Pain-free for life, we focus on lots of people with chronic pain, autoimmune disease, all of these different things. So inflammation is a massive factor there. So I know that the term inflammaging exists, so inflammation playing a role in the aging process. This is obviously going to be contributing to things like Alzheimer's and heart disease and so on. So could you kind of interpret and explain a little bit about that from your perspective?
Absolutely. And in the clinic, we see a lot of people with chronic pain issues, and there's a link for sure with inflammation systemically in the body, with inflammation in the brain that can contribute to a kind of dementia that actually can be caused by environmental toxicity, by infections, by gut dysbiosis. A lot of it boils back to the same things. When someone comes in with fibromyalgia or chronic pain or are dealing with autoimmune issues, I'm mostly looking at the very similar underlying causes. I'm looking at the gut, I'm looking at toxins, I'm looking at infections, I'm looking at triggers in the diet and lifestyle. And for autoimmunity, we need to know what's triggering the immune system. And some of those same things that trigger the immune system are what progress cardiovascular illness, what progress deterioration of the brain, what progress these same things we're talking about. So interestingly, the causes are almost very similar. So yes, we may do something we haven't talked about, like a tick-borne panel that looks at Lyme and co-infections. We might do 2 stool panels and a SIBO breath test if someone's really dealing with something we think might be stemming from the gut, that inflammation from the gut. We might look very deeply at environmental exposures and toxicities. And of course, for almost everyone, we're going to take a look at diet, lifestyle, sleep, stress, these kinds of things, movement and movement practices are all going to be very important. So when it comes to inflammaging, absolutely, we would say that the same inflammatory underpinnings to pain are going to also promote faster aging, and that would progress some of these quote unquote inevitables that we're talking about today.
Right. Even, the obvious on the body, right? As the muscles start to deteriorate or the bone deteriorates or the joints deteriorate, like that's pushing you towards that point too, without even that concept of it spreading throughout your body and kind of hitting everything.
Yeah. And even with heart issues, with atherosclerosis, we know that a lot of focus has been on cholesterol, but we know that you add inflammation and oxidation and you get a very bad picture as compared to if there's not so much inflammation or oxidation, there's much lower risk profile. So inflammation is really big in basically all of these. Yeah.
All right. Absolutely. So where are the greatest opportunities for people to live like healthier, happy, longer lives? Really? Because that's what we all want in the end.
Yeah, it is. It is. And of course, the basics are so important for people to start with looking at diet, looking at habits, looking at sleep, looking at stress management, dealing with those things first. And then second, after that, then it becomes important to look at supplementation because we are dealing with a situation where it's so rare that even in young children that I'm seeing nutrient markers test well. Even in young children of parents who are conscious, who are paying attention to diet, soils have depleted from magnesium, and there's lots of exposures to chemicals, toxins, plastics today, like we already talked about, microplastics. So it is pretty important for people to have some support, and supplemental support would be a place to go after the basics have been done. And then how do you know what to supplement? And that becomes a big open question. But some also breath practices, movement practices like meditation and mindfulness practices can be so important and helpful. And good, healthy relationships, play, purpose. These are all parts of what I would call the fundamentals. Tracking sleep and making sure sleep is deep and sufficient and adequate. And then, if those things have been dialed, then really seeing a provider to look for these infections, these toxins, these gut dysbioses, these things could be quite helpful. And, for those who are really wanting to live long and healthy and happy and strong lives also when resources allow to do some of these preventive screens and to look at these imaging that we've talked about and blood testing and things as a preventive even, but not before doing the basics of diet and lifestyle. First, get those down.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I spent years being a massive advocate of food for nutrition, supplements. No, it's a waste of money. And I've really turned the corner recently because understanding the nutrients not really being in the food and the process nature of everything. Like even, I grow like 80% of my own food now.
Amazing.
It's hard to keep that healthy food, even in all of that, because of the environment we're in, because of everything everyone else is doing. So it's kind of a crazy process for me to have gotten to that point where, as a doctor of natural medicine too, right? It's the main tool we have at our disposal is supplements. And I'm always like, you're taking 10 supplements? That's a lot of supplements. Let's try and pare that down. So I've turned the corner there. And I'm seeing the need for some of that, possibly more now than ever there's ever been before.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, it is really, even people who are tracking their food, growing their food, to really try and get the amount of, for example, even just potassium that used to be in hunter-gatherer diets is extremely difficult and very difficult to get the same amount of magnesium with soil depletions. And so, there are several key things where it's just either really, really challenging to get it from diet or there's some things that unless you want to eat a quarter to a half pound of liver a week, then it's going to be hard to get preformed vitamin A and choline in adequate quantities. And, it's, I think something in the high 90% choline deficiency. And that's a shame because choline's involved in brain health. It's involved in liver and detoxification health. It's involved in the formation of cell membranes. And it even is potentially helpful with cardiovascular issues. So fatty liver, it's related to. So we see things like that speak volumes about, okay, if you're willing to go the crazy mile and you're willing to eat like natto, fermented soy to get your vitamin K2, and then you're willing to eat a quarter to a half pound of grass-fed liver, and then you want to eat a couple of pounds of cold water fatty fish a week. And if you want to do every last meal and do all of the fermented foods and your own fermentation, you can get pretty close, but it's hard. It's really hard.
It is. And really, even for people that are cost oriented, the cost of getting to that point and doing all of that, the supplements, no matter how expensive they may seem on paper, are probably going to be cheaper than that and more accessible, more affordable. So absolutely. And then of course we always have to consider mindset, right? People that are constantly down on themselves and that don't believe they can get better. This can really, really deal massive amounts of damage to people dealing with chronic pain, chronic disease. How does that affect longevity?
It's incredible how much mindset affects longevity. There's a paper that looked at stress, and it looked at whether people believe that stress is harmful to their health and how much stress they have. And the people who reported high stress, who said it's harmful to their health, had an increase in mortality of almost 30%, which is pretty significant, meaning death of all-cause mortality. So it had a 30% increased risk of death from something. It didn't say what, but death from something. Those who had high stress, who said they believed that it was not harmful to their health, so same high stress, but did not believe it harmful to their health, had no increased mortality over those with low stress. Really weird that the belief about and the way in which a person relates to their stress actually it's a cohort study, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, but it looks at it begs question. And they did another study where they subjected people to a stressful event, and they told people that one group they told that you are going to do this stressful thing, and stress is bad for your health and it's probably going to cause problems. And the other group was told you're going to do this stressful thing and your body is going to respond in a way where you might notice your heart rate increase. You might notice your respiration increase, your breath increase. You might even feel a little bit of sweat perspiration. That's good. That's normal. That's what's going to help prepare you to do this challenging thing. And both people had increased heart rate. But what was different is that the group that had been told it was bad for their health had increased blood pressure because they constricted the vessels. And the ones that were told it was a healthy response, their vessels dilated. So the same blood flow and increased heart rate did not increase their blood pressure because they had a different belief and a different mindset about it. And there's even studies that show that immune protein in the gut, secretory IgA, changes based on the perception of whether something is stressful, not just the event itself. And I could go on, but there's a lot about the way in which a person relates to the challenges, the struggles, the health picture that can impact a lot. And I believe there's a lot of epigenetic change and a lot of gene expression change due to the way in which a person's inner world relates to their emotional state, their life, not just how their outer world is interacting with their body and their mind.
Well, absolutely fascinating. And it's interesting to think because, we sit there and we say to people, don't stress, stress is bad. Stress is going to do these things. And so we're actually I at least am actually perpetuating that and potentially making it a little bit better. So anyone listening, stress is good. You're fine, It's kind of a fine line to walk because you're right. It's that mindset. And we see this all the time with people that are trying to get over chronic pain. They're trying to get over chronic disease and they can't quite get there. And it's that mindset piece of they've come into this thinking there is nothing they can do that will ever get them better because that's where they've hit. And we can create and fulfill our own destinies, really, is what this is all about.
I like the term stress resilience because what that is that's talking about how do we stay resilient in the face of the stressors that are inevitable. Of course, if a stress is optional, eliminate it. And if it's inevitable, just like these progressions in the body, how do we relate to them? And what can we do upstream as best we can? And I find that with chronic pain and autoimmunity and chronic illness, we do see there's a lot of, I would say, trauma, maybe not capital T trauma, but a subtle trauma of I'm continuously seeing example. I talked to person after person, a person in their young 20s recently, and she's struggling. She's been in and out of a wheelchair. And to see that in your 20s and look all around at your friends who are partying and drinking and staying up late and not taking care of themselves and seemingly in okay health, and to be struggling like that. A lot of people are continually in their face comparison of I'm trying and paying attention and doing things for my diet and sleep and stress and health and supplementing and seeing providers. And yet I'm struggling more than these people around me. It gets really hard really quickly. And there is a capacity for an understanding of how gratitude works that I think is really important for people. Because what gratitude says is I'm so grateful that I have what I do have. I'm so grateful that I have a roof over my head. Kind of what that's saying is there are some people who don't, or I could be homeless. It's a weird thing to think about that's what gratitude is. But gratitude it's kind of a comparison against a worse situation than your own and being grateful for what you do have. And so I apply that. I help people to apply that to their chronic pain, their autoimmune issue, their struggle, to say, gosh, I'm so tired. I'm so fatigued. I'm struggling with a lot of pain. And I'm glad I'm not hospital bound in a bed, unable to move, unable to get dressed, unable to do that part of my life. There are some people who can't do that. I'm so grateful that I can do that. And at least that gives a sense for a little bit of a sense of being in a spectrum and not at the bottom looking up towards, I wish I could be better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Miles. It was a pleasure. And to our audience, I just want to invite you to check out the show notes for links to Dr. Miles's work to find out more about what he does and how you can contact him. Otherwise, take care and tune in next time for another episode of Pain Free for Life.
Thanks for listening to Pain Free for Life. Be sure to follow us, share the show with family and friends, and leave us a review on iTunes. Every time you share the show, you are helping someone take their life back from pain. Visit painfreeforlife.com for more resources, including our free guides to microcurrent, the Hache protocol and inflammation, as well as our blog and online community full of people just like you, successfully overcoming all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And stay tuned for the next episode of Pain Free for Life.